Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listener. It is Wednesday, September 5th, and I am pleased to be speaking to you as I walk home on another roasty, toasty day. The weather tells us that the temperature is going to drop precipitously in the next couple days, and by next week we should have some autumn. But for now, I am really sweating up a storm, so if the microphone shorts out because I've soaked it, that's why. Ooh, that's really gross. Oh well, such is nature, folks. Well, today I decided I would take a chance to give you a short discussion of a game I've played a couple times yet. I wouldn't say I have the deep knowledge of it necessary for a message from the deep, so this is going to be a shooting from the hip episode for a game I've played 3 times now, and that's Raids. Raids is a newly published game from Iello that came out either at Gen Con or shortly before Gen Con from Matthew Dunstan and somebody Gilbert. I say somebody is not actually the first name, but I don't remember the name of Gilbert, but it's Gilbert and Dunstan. I've mentioned several times before that Gilbert and Dunstan are a design pair that I am fond of because I really liked their first outing, Elysium. Now they also released Professor Evil and the Citadel of Time, which did not tickle my fancy as much. I mean, I love the title, but all the reviews I read of it were pretty middling. So I decided not to get that one, and it hasn't come across my transom just to play it. But boy howdy, am I glad that I picked up Raids. So Raids is a 2 to 4 player game built around the idea of Vikings going on journeys around the North Sea. Each player plays a leader of a Viking longship who goes out on 4 journeys or 4 expeditions over the course of the game. And at the end of the game, the person who has gathered the most points wins. The gameplay feels a little bit like Tokaido. Tokaido is a Japanese themed game about taking a long meditative journey, and it uses a mechanism that probably has a formal name, but I will call last in line goes next. So the idea in Tokaido is that there are all these places you can stop, and when you go, if the person who's the furthest back gets to go next. And they get to pick any destination ahead of them that's not occupied. And then when they stop, they do the thing that's there, and then the next person who's furthest back gets to go. This can mean occasionally in Tokaido, somebody will get to take 2 or even 3 turns in a row because the people ahead of them just left spaces open. And that's pretty amusing. Well, Raids uses the same mechanism. If you get to go next if you are in the back. But it's got this interesting element because unlike Tokaido, in which the level of interaction goes at the most to I'm taking the spot you wanted, Raids is a confrontational game. I mean, would a game about Vikings be fun if you couldn't do any Viking raiding? It's literally called Raids. So the way that Raids works, when it's your turn to move, first off, you must go at least as far as the next player in line. In other words, if the second place player, or the second to last player, passes me and then goes 2 stops ahead of me and then stops at the 3rd stop, those 2 stops are now out of bounds for me. I'm no longer able to go there. Because the rule is you have to go at least as far as the closest ship in front of you. So then on your turn, you pick up your ship and you move at least as far as the ship in front of you. And then you can keep going or you can stop. If you keep going, you go until you find a space where you can stop without fighting or whatever. If you stop where there's another ship, then you start a fight. And the way the fight works is pretty simple mathematically, although it breaks the logic. Your instinct about how the fight should work isn't what actually happens. The way it works is you put your ship at the spot where you want to go, and you take one of the Vikings off your ship. You have this cardboard representation in front of you. Your tableau has these little Viking meeples on them that are just amazingly cute. Anyway, you take your Viking meeple and you take one meeple and throw it into the common supply. You sacrifice one meeple to start the fight. And then your opponent, the person who's already at that spot, can either stay in the fight or leave. If they leave, then you're left alone at the spot. If they stay in the fight, then they have to spend 2 Vikings off of their ship. And now here's where it gets confusing. Our instinct would be that for me to stay after they've spent 2, I would need to spend 2 more, so I've spent a total of 3, right? No, that's not how it works. Instead, after you spend 2, I now have to spend 3. Not 3 total, but 3 more right now. And then for you to stay, you have to spend 4 more. What this means is that most fights don't go more than 2 rounds. I think one time in the 2 or 3 games I've played, I've seen someone spend 4 Vikings to stay at a place, but it's pretty rare. And it's a brutal cost, because if you spend 4 Vikings to stay, you've spent 6 total to keep that space versus the 4 total that your opponent spent. The price gets ratcheted up really fast. But anyway, so you resolve the fight, and then if you're the player who moved and you go to a place and then you win the fight, then your opponent immediately starts their turn by leaving and going, and they could do the same thing. They could go up 1 space, sacrifice 1 Viking to contest that space, and then the next player has to stay or leave. So that's how the movement goes. So the way that you score, each place where you could stop has a tile, and those tiles give points in different ways. There's a set collection tile, so if you get a certain number of runes, the more runes you get, the more points you get. There are monster tiles where as you go by, you lose 1 Viking, the monster just reaches out and plucks a Viking off your ship, or you can stop and fight the monster and sacrifice the number of Vikings equal to the monster's strength, and then you get to kill the monster and take that tile. And of course, that's points at the end of the game. There are also a number of tiles that are upgrade tiles that you get to add to your Viking ship. Some of these will make your ship go faster, some of them will give you better recruiting power, so at the end of each expedition you get more Vikings. There's a lot going on, but it's relatively simple. I think it's a game that takes like 5 to 10 minutes to teach, and that's I would say for experienced gamers, probably on the 5-minute end. On people who need a little bit more help, 10 minutes is fine, but it's definitely entry level. You could play it with, I think it's on level of a lot of light games. Raids is simple enough that it's relatively easy to teach. You can teach it to experienced gamers in about 5 minutes, I would say, and gamers who are relatively new would probably need 10 minutes or so. But then the whole game takes about 45 to 50 minutes to play on your first play, and I could see experienced players clicking through it in a half an hour. It's very satisfying because the components are excellent, really nice art. Like I said, super cute Viking meeples. There are a few places where you earn coins, and those coins are all metal coins. And the tiles are all nice, well designed, lovely to look at. Components that you actually use when you get a ship upgrade, it goes onto your ship, and then the iconography is really strong. Overall, just a very strong production. Really quite satisfying from the perspective of purchasing the game. So, a few comments about what's going on in raids. First off, like I said, I think of it as a kind of Viking Tokaido, in part because what makes Tokaido so fun is the control you have over where you go, and the constant tension of, do I pass up this thing to go for this other thing and leave this first thing for my opponents, or do I try to get everything that I have a chance to and lose out because I didn't specialize? So that conflict between the two things makes for a really interesting dynamic. On the other hand, the thing that's less satisfying about Tokaido is that it feels very uninteractive. You do your thing as you're cruising along, and your opponents do their thing, and at the end you see who has the most points. And really the only thing you can do is block your opponents a little bit, which at best slows you down. I mean, it might slow them down a little more than you, but it slows you down too. Raids, on the other hand, has a really interesting dynamic in which you can spend your Viking guys to contest spaces, but your Viking guys are the thing you use for everything. When you want to fight monsters, you use the Viking guys. And so in order to balance what you need, it's a much trickier proposition. And as such, it's really satisfying from that perspective. Like I said, the components are excellent. The metal coins in particular. Now, unlike a lot of games where you have metal coins, you don't get very many of the coins when you're playing. When you play raids, you're going to get a handful of the metal coins at the very most. There's 2 or 3 available each round, and there's 4 rounds. So, as opposed to, a game where you're using metal coins as currency, you're going to end up with a lot of them at the end. And you can play with them and stack them and clink them together. That's not really as easy to do here, but they're still lovely components. There are a couple downsides, I would say, that make the game a little frustrating, at least from my perspective of only having played a couple times. First off, one of the big ways you score points is to deliver goods. And you get goods by finding the spot and adding them to your ship. And then later, you stop at a port and you get to sell your goods. Well, like everything else in this game, only one person gets to use a port. When you take a port, you take the tile, and then you get to sell goods off your ship when you take the tile. At the same time, no one else gets to use that port. And so you're going to want to fight over the ports. But when you take goods, it also reduces the number of Vikings you can have on your ship. So if you take very many goods, you basically blocked yourself out of being able to fight for any of the ports. Because the tiles are distributed randomly each round, you could have a situation where you maybe get one good more than you should have or something, and then the ports are at the very end of round 2, and so you might end up having to dump a bunch of Vikings over the side and not being able to sell your goods. Maybe someone else can outfight you for the port. All of that is a little frustrating, and I feel like if there is a pressure point in the game where the balance and the pleasure of the game feels a little off, right now on this play, it's that way. I would also say, while the game does feel like it's got the potential to be close most games, there also isn't much of a catch-up mechanism. So if you're behind, if you get to the end of round 2 or round 3 and you're doing pretty badly, I have trouble seeing somebody catching up in round 4. There's just not enough points to go around, and strength begets strength in certain ways. And so I think the ability to catch up is probably the second drawback of the game. But on the plus side, it's a half an hour to 45 minutes to play, so by the time you're feeling bad that you're losing, the game's over. Which is really satisfying. So I'm very pleased in my first couple plays of raids. I'm hoping that further plays will vindicate keeping it in my collection. Dunstan and Gilbert did an excellent job on this one, and I'm looking forward to playing it some more. Have you gotten to play raids? What do you think of it? Pop by BoardgameGeek Guild 3269 and let me know. And with that, I'm just about out of time. So thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye. Doot, 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 doot.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.